Nobody could have predicted that the man who starred in hundreds of TV shows would now be watched by millions of people. One day, inside the icy stone walls, people from all over the world would bend their heads in terror of a federal jail, but the reality is considerably more brutal than what the media has ever depicted. Stated that Rick Harrison is facing more than a life sentence on the charges pertaining to human trafficking and money laundering. He is being severely mistreated by prisoners who used to watch him on television and now hate everything he symbolizes privilege, what pushed a once-loved TV personality to the extreme of being psychologically and physically damaged while incarcerated, which made Rick Harrison a prime target in a correctional system that is already notorious for its brutality, even against ordinary prisoners. And the more important question: was it the precise spark that started the unrelenting punishment Harrison now faces every day, or is celebrity really a shield? One day, the shadowy side of the spotlight. For many years, Rick Harrison upheld the persona of a prosperous businessman, a model father, and a shrewd TV personality. Has a remarkable knack for evaluating antiques. However, notoriety frequently brings with it shadows, and in Rick's case, those shadows weren't temporary, they were the contours of an. He is now charged with creating and operating a subterranean system behind the camera. The initial suspicions were raised by former coworkers and not by the media. Business partners, rumors of unrecorded cash transactions involving imported goods with ambiguous certifications. As early as 2016, untraceable investments started to circulate in business circles in Las Vegas. When porn stars peaked, it attracted over 5 million viewers annually. History Channel episode It was a huge hit, and no network wanted to examine one of its most financially viable celebrities. That changed in 2017 when the FBI started expanding its examination of money laundering in the porn industry in Nevada internal. According to studies, Las Vegas is among the top 5 U.S. cities with the highest volume of unmanaged cash flow. Prominent companies such as gold and silver porn. Scotty Early was immediately drawn to a store where annual transactions amounted to millions. Rick wasn't named by the probes, but by the middle of the 20s. In 2018, a number of dubious financial documents surfaced in tax returns and bank accounts associated with his business. By the end of 2024, the FBI took action. Rick's $3.7 million mansion in Las Vegas was the site of the pre-dawn raid. Dozens of document boxes, hard drives, money, and records related to suspected shell firms connected to Rick, either directly or indirectly, were confiscated. The story was widely reported by CNN, Fox News, and TMZ, with headlines that porn stars who are being investigated for money laundering shocked the public. Internet chaos was caused by the picture of Rick the self-assured. The keen eyes and smile were abruptly replaced by the image of him in handcuffs, clearly agitated as he was escorted from his house while cameras flashed in. Rick Harrison was formally charged with money laundering in April 2025. Conspiracy to commit federal financial fraud and human trafficking. According to the indictment, Rick utilized his porn shop as a cover for business to launder millions of dollars in illegal funds, some of which had a multi-state connection. Digital evidence is apparently crucial to the people trafficking operation. Demonstrated Rick's active participation in approving and planning these transactions during the trial. Rick's attorneys contended that he had been duped by trusted colleagues and were unable to supervise all internal operations, but prosecutors provided a plethora of supporting documentation, including emails, phone logs, and signed contracts, demonstrating his full participation in the illegal enterprise. Following months of court appearances, drama, Rick Harrison received a life sentence without the possibility of release. The public Reaction was divided, half were shocked, and the other half claimed he deserved it. However, few foresaw what would happen next. The legal matter was concluded, but for Rick Harrison's actual sentence had just started. He was imprisoned and deprived of his authority and notoriety. He was now simply another prisoner, and not the star of a popular show. In that scenario, the penalty would be severe, physical, and significantly more severe than the law. Psychological suffering in an environment where survival and fame are meaningless signifies everything to his first shock in prison shortly after his death. Rick Harrison received a sentence and was moved to a medium security facility. More than 1,200 prisoners, including drug dealers, are housed in a federal prison in Nevada. From financial scammers to convicted killers with a criminal history as audacious as his end. Rick's name was well known throughout the nation, making him impossible to overlook for. Ironically, the celebrity that previously protected both prisoners and correctional personnel. He was now being haunted by a double-edged sword in the media industry. From the moment Rick noticed the change in the environment, the prison walls were gone. The studio illuminates the cheering and autograph-seeking. Fans were replaced by the icy measuring stares of seasoned prisoners. Men shunned by society are suddenly seeing one of its most recognizable faces come in. His unexpected entrance was like fresh meat being put into a cage in their world. Reward for those who are desperate to subjugate, control, or utilize him as leverage inside. The harsh social structure of the prison, according to Bureau of Justice statistics, up to 18% of prominent people with media backgrounds or prisoners are physically assaulted in there. For Rick, the number wasn't quite 4 times greater than the norm for the first year. Simply a statistic, but he sensed a threat every time he left his cell. He initially made an effort to maintain a low profile, making no eye contact and no talking. Complete obedience to guards, yet in a prison setting, quiet isn't. The guards used to be impartial, but that's a weakness, and weakness is never forgiven. No special treatment was given to celebrity convicts. In fact, several were blatantly antagonistic, seeing Rick as just another celebrity who became a prisoner. According to reports, during roll call, the person who earlier believed he was untouchable said, "Don't think being on TV gets. You're 98416 in here, nothing more." That lack of concern created a risky void where no one was watching out for Rick. Where fear is deadly and the rules are etched in blood on fists. 3 indirect threats were given to Rick in the first week: a damp towel, placed a broken razor blade next to his bed, and a scrolling note in his cell. No one took responsibility for the letter that said, "Hollywood don't survive here." It was obvious that he wasn't welcome and that one mistake could cost him a lot of money. He started to be the focus of all attention, not just from one group, but almost everyone glanced down at him in the hallways and muttered about him. Mess hall and frequently bypassed the food line. His mental state changed too. Rapid, once a man accustomed to managing groups, making quick choices, and when Rick was on camera, he was unable to maintain eye contact for longer than 3 seconds. There was no way out of sleep. He would awaken to ominous laughter tapping at his door, or just the unshakable sensation of being observed in a location. Rick started to descend into a world where every gesture could be interpreted as a threat. State of quiet terror, losing his normal poise. The violence hadn't arrived in blows, but it arrived silently in snide looks amid the solitude where he had no one to turn to. This was the initial stage of psychological torment and brutality in prison, where every night concludes with the same query: will I live physically tomorrow? This type of protracted humiliation frequently precedes attacks in prison. According to data from the Prison Policy Initiative, 70% of violent 1 to 3 weeks of verbal and psychological abuse precede assaults. Degradation. Rick was aware that he was exactly following that pattern, but the most depressing aspect was that there was no way out, and no one wanted to help. Unraveling had started with the gradual deterioration of his mental faculties rather than with fists. Rick Harrison, who used to be in charge of all negotiations, was unable to even. 3 weeks after Rick's first assault, he had to deal with his own fear. The predictions became a reality when Harrison was imprisoned. It occurred on a hot June afternoon during the allotted 45 minutes of yard time for prisoners to socialize, exercise, or get some fresh air under the casual supervision of a few of guards. The yard was open, but nobody was hidden. It wasn't merely a extended area, it was a subterranean arena where power and status were. Rick went out as usual, his life continually shaped by blood and terror. He selected a peaceful area close to the barbed wire fence, by an ancient concrete seat, maintaining his separation from the groups of prisoners playing, smoking, or lifting weights. Basketball, but it wasn't like the others. 4 men, all of whom were veterans. He was approached by prisoners from cell block C, who were led by a tall, heavy Vince, a Caucasian man with tattoos, is regarded as the enforcer in the institution. Vince said, "Hey TV boss up," softly enough to get the others to stop. "And here. You made millions selling trash on TV, so why do you curled up like a terrified rat now?" Rick remained silent and continued to stare at the ground while attempting to maintain composure. But Vince wasn't finished and stepped in close. Leaned down and put a hand on Rick's shoulder, saying, "You're nothing here. Your leftovers got." Without waiting for an answer, Vince abruptly pushed Rick to the floor. After a round of soft laughter, Rick was struck hard in the stomach. Chest next to his mouth. The guards were standing far away, acting as though they. Since no one stepped in, the yard became quiet, and Rick Harrison was heard in that quiet. For the first time in his life, he was jumped. Within a minute the group. Rick laid there with his face swelled and his lips split, and he left as if nothing had occurred. Nobody arrived to assist him until the blood began to leak from the corner of his mouth. When the yard bell sounded, did an elderly prisoner discreetly assist Rick to the. He was cleaned up, his ribs were bound, and he was given 2 painkillers were fired without a report, charges, or repercussions. As a small matter, but Rick felt that beating signaled a point of no return. He felt for the first time that helpless, with no laws, safeguards, or justice, just the unvarnished truth of a man who, in the days that followed Rick, everything that had meant everything suddenly meant nothing. Started to understand the strict rules of the prison environment. There was no such thing as neutrality. Since Rick didn't belong to any side, each prisoner had a side. A free target, and then Frank arrived with. Served more than 18 years in prison, a seasoned individual well respected in every neighborhood. He sat next to Rick in the cafeteria one afternoon and made an offer instead of hitting him. Rick glanced at him and said bluntly, "I can protect you, but you need to have value." Frank grinned and said, "You had connections and you know how to move. Money is important in this situation, and you know how to convince others of that. However, you must choose a side or you will be dissected." It was survival, not kindness. Rick knew that if he didn't, he would be hunted down forever. But if he agreed, giving up his remaining honor from a man who had operated a respectable business conglomerate, he would now join an illegal internal economy that was. Inside the prison, drugs are used to launder money, influence guards, and oversee services. Rick became a scribe because the detainees trusted him, although he understood it was capitulation. writing and utilizing his intellect to handle discrete agreements amongst factions. Computations for criminals in exchange, he was shielded from further abuse and direct threats, but they didn't strike him and instead treated him with sullen disdain. But they regarded him with hatred and sympathy. He was no longer the object of admiration. Rick stopped a TV star who was only a desperate man trying to escape murderers. He wrote notes in the margins of a Bible in his cell, not trusting anyone. Confessions in private: I committed mistakes, but do I deserve this? Withdrew from nearly everything and just spoke when required. He became hypervigilant and avoided making eye contact, but that simply served to attract a different type of psychological deterioration. He didn't require physical assault. Silently jeered him. Someone might yell, "Where's your camera?" as he passed. "Crew now," or "What no reality show," as the sarcastic comments are being scrubbed. He was wearing the mocking whistles and the stares. Rick became nervous and had trouble sleeping. He had nightmares and saw visions of. He would wake up covered in sweat, his heart racing, after being hauled into the yard and put to death. But unable to disclose to others, the prison provided a system of psychological help for depressed prisoners, but Rick never enrolled. Fearing that it would be seen as a sign of weakness, which is a death sentence in prison. The National Institute of Corrections claims that prisoners who get mild, long-term psychological abuse as opposed to physical torture is 3 times. Rick was turning into a textbook example of someone who was more likely to experience serious anxiety disorders. Situation: it was the beatings that were shattering his mind, not the ongoing monitoring of humiliation and the gradual decline of identity in prison. Rick Harrison was no longer viewed by the public as a television tycoon. He was merely a good to be bought, sold, and then forgotten. The worst part was that he was beginning to think it was his 3rd beating. Rick Harrison began a new stage during his month-long incarceration, not one of adaptability but of complete breakdown following the selection of a side and the agreement to act as a mediator for Rick. Frank's crew believed he had gained some protection, but in jail alliances not last, and being on the wrong side can be a death sentence that happens slowly. It began with a bungled illegal tobacco transaction. A cargo concealed in the washing room did not arrive at its goal, and the prisoner. A guard caught the culprit red-handed, and rumors quickly spread throughout the yard. Rick, the quiet one, was the first name whispered after someone snitched. In a society where silence is frequently interpreted as a sign of. Rick sensed the change in energy when he became the primary suspect for disloyalty. Frank avoided making eye contact with the same men who had previously protected him. No longer did Rick's lunch companions, the 2 henchmen, show up. For Rick, that was the most obvious indication of all the cautions he had been given. Abandoned to his own devices, the assault occurred on a Wednesday. When prisoners were allowed to wander freely between the yard and communal areas after lunch, Rick strolled by himself while carrying his. He went to his normal location in the far part of the yard with his little notebook, but there were no groups or conversations, and there was an uncanny silence this time. The first thing that happened was the type of stuff you'd see before a hit in an old gangster movie. Informed Rick that something was amiss, and then, from behind a little utility shed at a distance, 3 men appeared at the end of the yard, including Vince, the same man who had attacked Rick in his first week, although Vince wasn't with his former group this time. The other 2 were Latino prisoners who were thought to be connected to a competing group. When opposing teams unite in prison, it typically signifies one thing: Rick, the target, has been marked, and nobody is defending him. Vince yelled, "Where?" as he turned to return to the building. They hurried Rick a hook to the jaw before he could respond, thinking we had an appointment. "You're going to Hollywood?" dropped him right away. One man grabbed his hair and slammed his boot to his ribs. Rick didn't scream, but blood trickled from his temple as his head hit the concrete. Didn't fight since he had lost all of his strength and instinct for survival. Surrendered despite the beating only lasting a minute. He suffered 2 cracked ribs, fractured right leg, broken cheekbone, and dislocated right leg when the guards eventually fled. The assailants strolled away without making any effort to hide. They didn't have to. They were correct when they said there would be no investigation. The incident was recorded as a disagreement with his detainee and handled internally by the solution. Rick was transferred to a different cell and brought to the hospital, this time with obvious interior wounds, but the most severe damage, the kind that an MRI cannot identify, was inside. Rick remained silent for 3 days, refused to eat, refused to get therapy, and was imprisoned. Rick turned his face to the wall when a psychologist came by. At one time, a nurse. He whispered, "I don't even know who I am anymore." The indications of